Well, today I'm going to do a review for the midterm. I hope you find this helpful. I'm not going to go over every single detail, but I'll certainly give you a heads up on some of the areas that are covered in the midterm and things you should review both in my PowerPoints and in the book. So, and I have lots of notes that I'll be referring to, so yeah, I'll be looking away and doing various things. All right, once again, as I've put in the announcement a couple of times, the midterm covers these chapters: 1, 2, and 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 12. All right, and I'm just going to go through, starting with chapter 1. I'll just work my way through them. That doesn't indicate any particular order for the test, but it's just easier that way. Also, I'm going to suspend giving you any readings or PowerPoints to watch during the week of this coming week of October 12th through the 16th. Remember, the test becomes available on October 12th, and it's available until midnight, at least I think it is like 11:59 on the 16th. You have 120 minutes to take the test. Make sure once you start the test that you don't try to pause it. That won't work. The test is continuous. If you stop it, then the computer assumes you are done. So you need to keep going. You're welcome to have your notes in front of you. It's pretty hard to flip back and forth of the book, but you're at home, you're doing this online, you're welcome to use whatever resources are easy, but it's all got to fit within that 120 minutes. That's a long time for a test that's only, let me make sure I've got it right here. That is only, how many questions long? 50 questions long. There are 48 multiple choice questions, and there are 2 short answer questions. And the test itself is worth 100 points total. So it's pretty straightforward. I tried to keep it as straightforward as possible. What else? What else do I need to think about here? Well, I'm sure other things will occur to me. I've made notes here, so let's get started with what I have. All right, chapter 1. All right, chapter 1 is called The Evolving Art of Public Speaking. Yeah, my book is over here. And The Evolving Art of Public Speaking, it covers a number of areas that I talked about in the first 3 PowerPoint lectures that I put online. I would highly recommend, for review purposes, not just this video, that you go back and look at my PowerPoints. Now remember, you don't have to watch my videos on YouTube again. I've put all of these PowerPoints into the Canvas files. It's a whole lot easier to go pull them up there, and then you can step through the PowerPoints yourself and review them, take notes, whatever you think might be important, rather than trying to just watch my video again. Certainly you're welcome to watch them again. That's what they're there for. But you don't have to do that. Those PowerPoints are in the Canvas files, so you can go and look at those. And I would highly recommend that. I tried to choose questions, and by the way, part of this whole Cengage thing is that I don't get to write my own questions anymore, which I don't like that. I like writing my own questions. So the questions are based on what the chapters have, but I do at least get to go through, and I'm trying to readjust here, try to go through and pick the questions that relate best to my lectures. So again, that's why my PowerPoints will probably be one of your best bets for review. Also, on the on the book online, there are quizzes at the end, and those quizzes, if you want to go through and do them as practice, those are good places to do that, and you will not be penalized. There's no grading that goes on with those quizzes. I haven't set them up to do that. So anyway, back to chapter 1. All right, so chapter 1, let's see, it covers, pretty much everything I talked about in the first couple of lectures, the audience, making connections, and so on. And then there's a little bit of history. Make sure you remember I talked about Aristotle. Make sure you remember him. There's also on page 8 of chapter 1, there's a section on the 5 arts of public speaking. There are no questions about that on the test, so that might help a little bit. All right, so let me look at my other notes here. Make sure you review the PowerPoint on ethos, pathos, and logos, because there are questions about that. In fact, the questions on ethos, pathos, and logos are kind of sprinkled throughout the test, so make sure you're comfortable with that. Also, in chapter 1, they talk about transferable skills. In other words, is there something actually useful in a public speaking class that you might be able to use someday? Make sure you look at that. Oh, let's see. I don't want to spend too much time per question here. Chapter 1. Remember, there's ethos, pathos, logos. Chapter 1 also mentions mythos, which is all about culture and storytelling. I don't ask any questions about that either, so there you go. A little bit of help. What else do I have here? I already mentioned Aristotle. Make sure you understand the idea of rhetoric, and that's covered in chapter 1. I talked about that in that one of my PowerPoints as well. Now, chapter 2, I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 2 here. Building your confidence. All right. I covered that in the PowerPoint on speech anxiety. So make sure, I really covered that pretty thoroughly. Make sure you review that PowerPoint. Now, obviously review all the PowerPoints, but make sure you're familiar with what I talked about in the speech anxiety PowerPoint, because I tried to find questions that related directly to my lecture based on that. Also, it's interesting. In chapter 12, giving your first speech or giving your speech, they kind of double back and talk about breathing in chapter 12. Well, whatever. There are questions about breathing, so make sure you look at those. All right, continuing on here. Let me just flip through chapter 2, see if there's anything in particular I should tell you. The uncertainty, and again, this is all in my my PowerPoints, but I talked about the various uncertainties that can cause speech anxiety. Have a look at that. Relaxation techniques. if I can even speak coherently here. And then chapter 2 also mentions things like relabeling, visualization, and so on. Have a look at those. Again, it's all in my PowerPoints. And there's some funny cartoons in chapter 2 if you want to look at them again. All right, so yeah, I'm looking at page 32. It says practice your speech. Yes. And this keeps coming up in the various chapters. In chapter 2, it says, know your introduction and conclusion well. Remember, and I talked about that a lot, so be aware of that, and also why, what the introduction does. I'll come back to this, and why the conclusion is so important. But again, I'll come back to that. All right, so let's see here. Chapter 3. Make sure I've got all my chapters going here. Chapter 3 is listening. Ah, yes, Chapter 3 is listening. Let me flip through these other notes here. All right. Okay, Chapter 3 talks about strategies for effective listening. Have a look at that section. And then, of course, I spent a fair amount of time on the Hurrier model of listening, and there are some questions about that. Here's a suggestion. Will I get fired for this? No. Like I said, you can use your notes, whatever you want. You might want to, there's a chart in the book for the Hurrier model of listening. You might want to just keep that handy because it could help you answer some of the questions. So, and I don't think I'm certainly not giving away the questions, but I think you'll find that helpful. Let me see. Yeah, there's 5 or 6 questions based on Chapter 3. I think the whole idea of effective listening is really, really important. Now then, Chapter 5. Let's see what Chapter 5 is. Okay. Remember, I saved Chapter 4. That will be covered in the second half of the class, and there'll be test questions about Chapter 4 on the final, but not on the midterm. All right, Chapter 5 is all about adapting to your audience. There's a number of questions about this. I've done PowerPoint lectures for all of these chapters. You might want to look at that. Once again, for that chapter, I utilized the PowerPoints that were provided by the publisher, and so it mirrors the chapter exactly. There are some terms in Chapter 5 about understanding your audience, and I will the speaker audience connection, and it talks about that. Let's see, challenges of audience delivery, and yeah, make sure, and this is on page 83, make sure you look at this again. Identify commonalities, establish your credibility, include supporting materials, use appropriate language, and so on. Have a look at that. That's worthwhile. And then over on page 85, and it's one of the slides in the PowerPoint, it talks about audience standpoints. Make sure you're familiar with that, because that is an important concept. And yes, there are questions about that, so be familiar with that. All right, what else we got going on here? All right, that's all Chapter 5. All right. Oh, and in Chapter 5 also goes into a fair amount of information about gathering data. At least review that, and the slides, I think, are the easiest way for this, but at least review that and make sure you understand the different types of questions, open-ended, closed-ended, that sort of thing. What else in here? Let me flip back here real quick. Yeah, that should do it for Chapter 5. Now, I'm skipping Chapter 6 for the midterm. I did not ask you to reach. That's researching your topic. We'll save that for the next round of chapters, and we're going on to Chapter 7, supporting your ideas. So there we go, supporting your ideas. As I said, I'm just going through this in a linear fashion because it's easy to turn the pages that way. All right, so I talked about making sure you know the different kinds of survey questions and stuff. I gave one of my presentations about Chapter 7. Let's see here. All right. Okay, and in chapter 7, they give examples of narrative, examples, definitions, testimony, facts, and statistics. That's on page 132. You might want to take a look at that chart. The chart's also in the PowerPoints. And this is the one I think I said was a little bit like English class. The authors talk about metaphors and similes. Be familiar with those. They really are important to any good speech because they really help you connect with your audience. So be familiar with those. And I'll just flip through here to make sure I'm not missing anything. The institutional stories, cultural stories, specific examples, general examples. That was all in that PowerPoint. What else do we have here? Pages are hard to turn. Analogies. Okay, then take a look. It starts on page 139. Take a look at and know the difference between expert testimony versus celebrity testimony versus lay testimony. In other words, what has the most credibility? All right, and then I'm flipping through my notes and the chapter here. Make sure I don't miss anything. Yep, types of testimonies, types of examples. All right, so that pretty well takes care of chapter 7. Now, chapter 8 is organizing and outlining your speech. I'll double check. Yes, organizing and outlining your speech. Remember I gave 2 different presentations, 2 different PowerPoints that helps sum up chapter 8. Make sure you review those PowerPoints. I think they'll be very helpful. I talk about ways to balance your speech. Make sure you're familiar with that. What makes a well-balanced speech. Now, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on either transition statements or the thesis statement. And it is in the chapter. And I'll be coming back to that, but there's a few questions that popped up. Remember the thesis, and I did talk about this. Yes, I did. I did talk about the thesis statement. The thesis statement is always in the introduction. It's what Churchill said, tell them what you're going to tell them about. So the thesis statement is always found in the introduction, and it's a short 1-sentence statement, maybe 2 depending on the speech, but no more than that. That very clearly states this is what my speech is about. All right, so the thesis statement is in the introduction. Transition statements, and I gave examples of these in my self-introductory speech, and that's where I call those bridge statements, where it tells your audience that you're moving on. So an example. So today I've told you I'm going to talk about the sinking of the Titanic. Let me begin by the maiden voyage itself when the Titanic left the dock. Okay, that's a transition statement. You know I'm moving on. I'm about to move into the story of the early part of the voyage. All right, so transition statements. Yeah, what else we got here? Okay, ways to organize your speech. Make sure you're familiar. Remember there were 4 types and 5 patterns. Again, kind of like with the Hurrier model. If you have notes, maybe lay those out, because those are a little confusing to keep track of. I mean, all the years I've been doing this, I have to think about it myself. Let's see, the 4 types are object, process, event, and concept. Those are the 4 types. And I know I'll get confused if I try to go through the patterns. Also, and I've double, triple checked here. In those patterns, I mentioned that one of them in the book is listed. Well, here, let me just let's see. Developing the main points. They give lots of examples in this chapter about patterns. Okay, topical patterns. narrative pattern. Okay, what am I looking for here? Yes, on page 160, Monroe's motivated sequence. There are no questions about Monroe's motivated sequence on this test. We'll save that. As I said in my lecture, I think that's much more appropriate for persuasive speaking. So I'm saving that. All right, what else do I have? Let's see, continuing on here. Okay. This is more about organizing your speech. So yeah, make sure you have a good idea of oh yes, make sure you have a good idea of what happens in the introduction. Yes, remember I talked about that. The parts of the introduction, telling us your name, and then your attention getter, the grabber. Make sure you know what that is, the thesis statement, and so on. Make sure you understand the parts of the conclusion of the speech. All right, types of grabbers, types of attention getters. All right, and then chapter 7 kind of goes on and on here. Excuse me, chapter 8 goes on and on, organizing and outlining your speech. It does talk about outlining your speech. I have, excuse me, I dropped my notes. There we go. I know what I'm doing. All right. So it really covers two different things in my mind. It could have been two chapters. One is the types and patterns of speeches, and the second is the actual outlining of the speech itself. So look at that, and of course, I think if you will look at my PowerPoint on outlining, once again, I tried to pick questions that were more closely related to exactly what I talked about. And there's a lot more detail at this point in chapter 8 about outlining that, once again, when we get to the informative and persuasive speech, will become a lot more important. So we'll be going back to that as well. All right. And then moving on to chapter 9, beginning and ending your speech. What do I have here? Beginning and ending your speech. Well, I've already told you. Look at my PowerPoints on introduction and conclusion, and beginning and ending your speech, establishing your credibility, preview of your main points, and so on. It's a fairly short chapter, but have a look at that. And then finally, chapter 12, as I said, is very much of a review of what I covered at the beginning of class. Everything from breathing techniques to what will make you comfortable or uncomfortable in preparing a speech, and also the whole idea of even I've gotten a little confused here. Okay, the different types of speech preparations, and that actually goes back to the other chapters. But remember, there's the impromptu, the manuscript, the memorized, and the extemporaneous. At least be aware of what each one of those means, and that's pretty easy. Impromptu, off the top of your head. Manuscript, meaning that you write out the speech word for word, which, by the way, I keep telling you, I don't think you need to do. I wouldn't do that, but again, I'll cover this more as we get into the other speeches. Memorization, you don't have to memorize. In fact, most people never memorize the speech, but at least be aware of that. And of course, then extemporaneous, which is the way I want you to try to give a speech. What's extemporaneous? It means that you've prepared and practiced your speech so you know exactly what you're going to be doing, but you have minimal notes on your outline, or if you want to use cards, that's fine. but you have minimal notes on the cards or your outline that just keep you on track. What's the advantage of this? Why would you do a speech that way? Because it helps you with eye contact. You're actually engaging the audience. And it sounds like you're just having a conversation with the audience. It's a one-sided conversation, but yes, it sounds very natural, and it's more enjoyable for your audience to listen to. So extemporaneous is really, really important. All right, and then finally, again, almost everything that was in chapter 12 is in those early lectures that I gave. I keep bashing the book. Chapter 12 probably could have been chapter 2 or 3 rather than waiting until the end. In chapter 12, they do discuss some topics that I did not put in my early lectures, things about doing speeches for the visually impaired, the hearing impaired, or perhaps you as a speaker have some of these issues that you might want to address. So at least take a look at that. And then again, the end of chapter 12 is exactly what I talked about in Successful Speaking, that very early PowerPoint. So have a look at that. All right, so there you go. So one more time, the midterm is over chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then we skip chapter 4. Don't panic. We skip chapter 4, go to chapter 5, we skip chapter 6, and then chapter 7, 8, 9, and 12. So 1, 2, and 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 12. Those are the chapters covered by this midterm. I hope this was helpful for you, and if you have any specific questions, I'll certainly try to help you with them, and just email them to me, and we'll try to make this as easy as possible. Once again, and one of the things I detest are true and false questions. I just hate those kind of questions on a test. There are none. So again, remember, there's 48 multiple choice and just 2 short answer questions. I don't think you're going to have any trouble with this test, and you shouldn't have any problems. Also, one more time, remember, I'm not going to assign any readings or post any lectures the week of October 12th through the 16th, because that's when you have the midterm, and I want you to be working on and completing your self-introductory speech. The self-introductory speech is due on the 16th, on Friday. I've given you plenty of warning. I presented my own self-introductory speech. I've posted my outline. I've posted an outline template. Everything should be there. So please don't wait till the last minute to give this speech. I will know if the presentation that I see in your video is the first time you did it, or even the second or third time. You need to get going on it, prepare it, and practice it, and then record it and send it to me either through Google Docs or through YouTube. Those work the best. Do not, and I'll put this in an announcement, do not send it through Google Slides. I cannot open them that way. It needs to be an MP4 file of some format, and that works just fine. All right, again, if you have any questions, send me an email and I'll get with you as quickly as I can. Best of luck, and you'll be seeing my lovely face with some other announcements and so on as we go along here in the next few days. Take care. Talk to you later.